thank you all for coming this morning, and I hope you're all enjoying the snacks and coffee that Tim and Michelle have put on for everybody, and everybody else who's helped with that. And it was a beautiful day outside, so we'll try to keep this to within an hour and a half to maybe 2 hours with all the activities and stuff like that we have, so that we won't go too long with a beautiful day out there. So I'm Wesley Stanhope. I am the chair of the Housing Production Plan Update Working Group, and I'll let everybody else here introduce themselves too.
I'm Jerry Townsend. I'm also just a member of the working group.
Hey, good morning. I'm Jim Edamarna. So for those of you who know Joyce Smith, I'm her son, vice chair of the Housing Production Plan, and newly elected select board member. So thank you. And Wes is also newly elected planning board member.
Thank you all.
Good morning. I'm Christine Watkins, and I'm wearing many hats. I'm the clerk of this housing production group. I'm the secretary of the Historical Society and also a newly elected select board member. So we're very excited to have this amazing turnout today. So
thank you everybody for showing up and participating in this community, because that is very important. We're just talking about here at this table that it's very important to be engaged within the community. So just quick introduction to the agenda. We're going to do an introduction to the Housing Production Plan, background on the affordable housing and laws, and then a discussion on our Housing Production Plan strategy and recommendations.
And just to chime in for 1 second, this is going to be really boring if it's just the four of us sitting up here talking. So I would encourage people, put your hand up, ask a question, just give them the microphones. I'll repeat back the question so everybody hears it, we capture it, but this will be a lot more fun and engaging if it's more of a conversation.
That's right, Jim. So just a little bit of background here. It's not just the four of us that are sitting here that is part of the Housing Production Plan Working Group. There's actually 15 of us that were involved on this update. And also Jen Hager, the town planner, who is also helping out on this actual update. We've been working on it since about end of January and wrapping it up now. So it's been quite an effort between a large group representing the actual town. And the actual mission and goal, so there's some key things about this. We all love Sutton, so part of the main mission is to sustain its rural character. That is a key goal for any development within our town. And we have specific goals as part of the Housing Production Plan. And that is to provide some recommendations with the least impact on the rural character of Sutton, and also to provide an avenue to remain and live in Sutton with affordable housing for senior citizens, including 55+ living communities, for residents to downscale, and for local families and individuals who work in town. So navigating some key terms. We're going to go over a lot of different laws, recommendations, some zoning laws as well, and just to try to separate some of the things that we've been hearing around town or just over things over the years. So relative to 40B, well, Chapter 40B, Comprehensive Permit Law. This is a law from 1969 in the state of Massachusetts, and it's a law to encourage affordable housing. That's its goal. The Housing Production Plan, that's why we're here. We are here to talk about the Housing Production Plan that the 15 of us and Jen, so 16 of us, have been working on for the past few months. This Housing Production Plan is part of the 40B law. It's part of the 40B compliance process. Subsidized Housing Inventory, SHI. We're required underneath that 40B law to have 10% deed restricted affordable housing units. And then a town becomes in safe harbor. It's a technical legal term underneath 40B. We are in safe harbor if we have an approved housing production plan. That's why it's important to have it updated and submitted and approved by the state. And then if we produce a minimum amount of SHI, basically deed restricted affordable housing units per year, or when our affordable housing units reach that 10% goal, we're in safe harbor.
So if I could chime in just for a second here for a moment. When we think about affordable, keep in mind what that means is deed restricted, and those units go into a lottery to be allocated. So there's, you can think about affordable very specifically with that definition. There's also what I'll call practical affordability, making housing units that just cost a bit less. So we're going to talk later on about things like cottage housing. We're going to talk about accessory dwelling units. Those are ways, those generally speaking, would not be on the SHI, but that's a way for people who, especially if you retire, if you want to live near family, that's a lower cost way to stay in Sutton and have something that's affordable practically, but not technically affordable per this definition. But let's stop for a second, just do a check. Does this make sense? People understand what we're aiming for with the HPP? We're trying to comply with the laws, but then also have practically affordable units as well. Any questions?
Would you explain, please, what does deed restricted mean?
Deed restricted, so the question is, what is deed restricted? So the affordable house has to be, the actual home has to have the deed of the actual home has to be restricted to be affordable, so that it can only be used for the affordable housing. And the state will then use in their lottery program who actually will be allowed to live there. As in, like, there's a lottery for who is next up for on the affordable housing list to actually go to the actual deed restricted units.
Would that mean that who lives in there, they never own it, would be always owned by the state?
It's not, you don't know, it's not that you can own, like say, I could own or you could own a deed restricted unit, but it might not be that I could live in the deed restricted unit. You have to qualify to live in it. We'll get on in the presentation. We'll go over some more details about how we qualify, but you would need to be able to qualify to live within a deed restricted unit or to buy a deed restricted unit. So you might be able to buy a deed restricted unit and live in it, but you need to be able to qualify based on the regulations. There's qualifications for you to be able to buy one or rent one.
To give a quick example of the Leland Hills development, and I always forget the exact name of that, but that had some number of deed restricted units, and those units sold for roughly a little over $200,000. And so what happens is the value of those are essentially capped. They can't go up to be $400,000, $500,000. So as long as they are deed restricted, then that affects the market price, or it basically ensures that it doesn't go up to the market price. It stays at a lower deed restricted level to be affordable for people that meet the criteria.
We're also going to talk about some other laws and recommendations within this presentation. One of them is going to be the MBTA Communities Act. So you heard the terms like the MBTA. That is an actual newer law that has come out in the more recent years. That is separate from 40B. That's not, it's a totally separate law. This law is a new one. Its goal is to increase multifamily units. It's not out there to increase affordable housing. It actually has a cap for the amount of affordable housing units within it. So this is a law to increase multifamily, separate law from 40B. So we're going to separate these two laws from in our mind because they are different laws. Yes? Also, there's 40RS, Smart Growth Zoning. That 40R is a zoning tool with state financial incentives. This is it's a zoning overlay. This here is going to be an actual a way where we can zone a section of our town, a parcel of land, in which we could say we want to have some type of a mixed use with apartments or something like that. It's a zoning. It's not necessarily a law that the state is requiring, but it's where we could use for our future development how we see fit in Sutton. And it's a smart way of doing it, and we will get into that for financial reasons. So the housing production plan. Well, the housing production plan is a way for towns like Sutton to better understand our local housing needs and what kind of development constraints we have and how to work around them, what kind of opportunities we have in our town. Sutton's previous housing production plan was approved in 2019. They only last for 5 years, so it expired in 2024. That's why we're here. 2025, it's time to update the actual housing production plan. And that's why the group of 15 of us and Jen have been updating the actual housing production plan for the past 4 or 5 months, and we're getting towards the end of our process in the community engagement section now. How this actual update process works. Well, the town initiates the update. The planning board started the process by creating that housing production plan update working group. We've looked at a lot of the data throughout the town, comprehensive housing needs assessment, looking at the vision, what kind of goals and strategies could be used for the town, and update the housing production plan to submit back to the town. The town, as in the planning board and the select board, they will approve the housing production plan to send to the state. The state has to approve the actual housing production plan. That's the process for this update.
And there's a big question or a big topic here. We're going to talk about some ideas on this in this plan, some recommendations. Keep in mind that anything major would have to go for a town meeting. So for example, if we were to talk about cottage housing, for example, or where to put an MBTA zone, or where to put one of these mixed-use 40R, 40S zones, that would go before a town meeting. So we're collectively putting together these ideas to bring good ideas to the town, which then the townspeople vote on.
Yep. So what are the benefits of having this housing production plan update? Well, once we get it in and approved, it's a step for certification in safe harbor. So we can prevent unplanned 40B developments overriding local zoning. So I'll use the example, again, that I used the last time. For those of you that know about Burbank Woods right now, there's a zoning board of appeals meeting coming up again on Thursday. Zoning board of appeals coming up on Thursday for the second meeting. That's where the actual developer would come in and override our zoning. Well, if we are in safe harbor, so if we have this housing production plan in and approved by the state, and we're making way with affordable housing ourselves, then we could actually have ways to prevent outside developer coming in and overriding our zoning. We could be masters of our own destiny and how we could cater to our community, how we develop, we could guide our own development. Now, we need to go for our state target. So we can help Sutton reach our 40B 10% affordable housing goals. So again, we need to try to hit that 10% over time. The housing need, we address the unmet housing needs and demands in the community. We can influence the type, amount, and location of the housing. So again, instead of a developer coming in and just picking a parcel of land they purchase and overriding the actual zoning, we could actually focus where development should be. And then continuous community engagements. We're here today, for example, as community engagements. We should have continuous community engagements over the years, not just every 5 years, for example.
What's our percentage right now of 40B in your town?
You want that?
Yeah, the question is, what's our percentage that we're meeting towards the subsidized housing inventory unit goal, and that is 1.57. So we're, let's put this in numbers for a second. So right now as a town, we have 55 of these units. Ballpark, we need an additional 300. Technically 299, let's round it to 300. So we need an additional 300. So in roughly 40 years, 40 some odd years, we've had 55 of these units created and that are in our inventory. So the other key thing from a numbers perspective is, once this plan is developed, in order for us to stay in safe harbor, we need to add 18, 19, 20, roughly 20 units per year to stay safe, so that a developer has to follow our zoning laws. That's the key punchline that we're going to get into.
So we'll talk a bit more now about the actual 40B law, which is a Massachusetts general law, Chapter 40B, comprehensive permits. But instead of saying that the whole way out, we call it 40B. So every community in the Commonwealth must maintain at least 10% deed restricted subsidized housing inventory, affordable housing. Affordable units can be for sale or rented.
Hello.
Yes,
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
better, right in your mouth. Don't be shy.
Yep. There's a penalty for non-compliance. Again, a developer can construct any density development anywhere regardless of local zoning. Again, the example would be Burbank Woods. Developer must comply with Title V, Wetlands Protection Act, Building Code, safety regulations. So basically, safety, environmental, the state governed regulations, they still have to comply with those, but any local governing regulations for zoning, they can override. Chapter 40B, how do we create safe harbor and prevent unplanned from overriding? The approved housing production plan must be approved and filed on state. And here's where we start to get a little bit of the numbers that Jim was talking about. We need to increase the deed restricted affordable housing stocks by at least 0.5% a year or 1% over 2 years, which is 0.5% per year when you do the math. But somebody came up with that
How
formula.
about 2% by 4 years?
Yeah, I know. Or once we hit 10% overall and maintain 10%, we're good. The safe harbor benefit, a 40B comprehensive permit development can be prevented. The State Housing Appeals Committee will find the zoning board's denial consistent with local priorities of the town if the town is in safe harbor and rule against the developer's appeal. So that is key. If we are in safe harbor, we can prevent those unwanted developments.
Can you just mention that? So when you're not in safe harbor and a 40B developer comes to your community, for example, we recently had someone come to Armsby Road, and the select board did sign a memorandum of understanding, say they were willing to work with the developer. If the zoning board of appeals, and you're not in safe harbor, denies the comprehensive permit and the developer appeals to the state, I want to say it's almost 99% of the time the state will rule in favor of the developer. So the benefit of being in safe harbor is it removes the ability of the developer to appeal to the state because you're making adequate progress.
What is affordable as of 2024, 2025? 2024, area median income was $117,300. Housing that could be afforded by households earning up to 80% of the area median income. Afforded means spending 30% or less of your income on household expenses such as rent or utilities, or mortgages, taxes, and utilities.
Can you just define AMI?
You want to go through all the information on?
Jen, you can just confirm, but area median income, picture you had a list of incomes from the smallest to the largest for an area, and I think we're in the Worcester HMA region. So what happens with median, if anyone ever took statistics, it's just if there's 100 numbers on the list, it's the one that's in the middle. That's the median. So I think before we had some people not really understanding what median meant. Average would be you sum up the 100 and divide the total by 100. Median is just you take the list and you take the number that's in the middle of the total list.
If I could just chime in, because we're on this page for a second. If you look at these numbers and you say, what does this actually mean for monthly expenses? It comes down to $2,300 a month. So basically, at that 117 times 80% divided by 12 times 30%, that's $2,300 and change per month. So if somebody's renting an apartment, their rent plus utilities can't exceed $2,300, or if they're buying it, their mortgage, taxes, and utilities can't exceed that amount. And so It's a very dynamic thing because obviously taxes can go up in any year, insurance fluctuates, but that's just a rough number to think about. What does it mean for this to be affordable for somebody?
Thank you.
I wish I made that much money.
Here you go.
So breaking that down, what is affordable? For a one-person household, that would be $68,500 per year. Two-person, $78,250 per year income. Three-person household, $88,050 per year. Four-person, $97,800 per year. There's also asset limits. Assets include but are not limited to equity in a dwelling in all cash, cash and savings accounts, checking accounts, certificates of deposit, bonds, stocks, cash value of retirement accounts, value of real estate holdings, and other capital investments. So these are going to be part of the equation too. Non-age restricted development, $75,000 asset limit. Age restricted, $275,000. Yes?
So these numbers are only based on the time that you buy the unit. So if all of a sudden, a month later, all my family gives me back the $200,000 that I told them to hide for me, I can still stay there.
Well, I'll say the question is that at the time of purchasing, at the time of purchase, well, we'll use that example, yes. At the time of purchasing, you qualify at these limits, and sometime in the future, you have a higher earning, then yes, that is okay, right? What do you say, Jen?
Your gain is capped when you sell it.
Your gain's capped when you sell the unit. At that question, yes.
For ownership units. So
It's just a moment in time.
Yes.
Thanks.
this is Jen Hager, the Community Development Director. That's the case for ownership limits. So if you rent, it's a little different. You have to qualify each year to show that you still meet the income limits. Okay, so ownership, yep. You can capture and capitalize on increases in income, on if it's a young couple, on a single person getting married, etc. But for rental, you have to requalify each year.
Thank you. Good example.
So all joking aside about assets, it is, from an estate planning point of view, I would recommend checking out trusts, irrevocable trusts, things like that. That's, you know, especially for this population, it's something to look at. I'm not an attorney, but that's from a,
You can't do them when you're irrevocable.
yeah, don't know, but it's just something to look at, how to trust and think about your assets for things like this.
Okay, so now we get into the numbers about the subsidized housing inventory and how it relates to Sutton. These are all based on the 2020 census. It'll get updated again on the 2030 census, so every 10 years on the census, looking at the housing inventory stock in Sutton and making that 10% requirement up, and that's where the updates come from. So based on 2020, there was 3,542 housing units in Sutton. Of that, 10%, 354 units were required to be deed-restricted affordable housing. In Sutton, there was 55 units already deed-restricted. That's 1.57%. That means there's a shortfall of 299 units in town. So, I know Jim kind of led to this already. If we did it units per year required to keep us in safe harbor, once we have our HPP plan as submitted and approved by the state and on file, we need to produce 18 units per year, or 36 units every other year, to stay in safe harbor. Is there any questions on that? Okay. Chapter 40B Comprehensive Law, bit more. Just some other key facts on it, every 10 new homes added in Sutton will require an additional affordable home to remain compliant. So we need 10% affordable housing. So every time right now that we build 10 homes in Sutton, we've kind of like taken money out of your savings account, right? We need to put one back in for our SHI, for our deed restricted affordable housing. So when we see 10 houses go up, we need one more to go into that 299 that we had listed from 2020. Well, more houses have been built in Sutton since, but we don't necessarily have the affordable housing units being built to compensate for them. So that's a key thing to remember, that every 10 that gets built, we need one more at least to be going back in to compensate for those. Note in rental developments, and these are key things to remember before we get to our recommendations. In rental developments, all units count towards the town's subsidized housing inventory, even though 25% are affordable. So if we have a recommendation that's for, say, an apartment building, and I'm gonna keep the numbers really simple for math. If it's a 100-unit building, if 25%, so 25 units are deed restricted affordable, 100 units count towards our affordable unit count for our town. So those 299 units we need to produce, well, we've produced 25% deed restricted in a 100-unit apartment building. It doesn't have to be one building, it could be 4 buildings in a court square or something like that. All 100 units count towards our SHI numbers. And the state wants more rental units. So, and that's true of that overlay, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the overlay 40R, 40S overlay, if we hit 25% in that, the state has, will also allow that to count for affordable housing as well towards our town goals. That's just key points that we want to just keep in our mind before we get to our recommendations. And the Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities offers affordable housing through the approved lottery. So that's kind of like your question there before about maybe who gets to live in it. The housing goes out to a lottery, and we can have some of it, say if we had affordable housing development in town, we could have some of the units be on a local priority, so that it could be for people in our community, and then some might not necessarily be in our community, but be for adjacent communities. And they are going to be on a lottery system, so there's going to be a backup of people looking for these units. So it's going to go through a lottery system for who meets the criteria for earnings. Doesn't necessarily just win the lottery and have that millions of dollars in the bank, for example, right? And meets the criteria and actually gets approved to get into that unit, or gets to purchase or rent that unit. So it's a lottery system to get into the actual system. Yep.
Is the state okay with having like a lottery just for Sutton residents? Would that be okay with them?
There's a preference, yeah, and there's a preference for a local, but it's not 100% preference. So it's not, we can't just build like a development and say it's all preference for Sutton.
Right.
It's a percentage that's preference for Sutton,
Okay.
and the rest are open for other.
We could do Sutton just for Sutton.
Correct. Yep.
One other question.
Yep.
Can the affordable units be all rentals, all apartments, or do they have to be single family homes?
So the question is, do the affordable units have to be all rental, or they have to be, say, for sale or single family? It depends on I'll go back, it depends on what kind of development is being proposed in recommendations or being built. So if it's an apartment building, it would be apartments. If there's say like a cottage housing or something like that, they would be individual or maybe semi-detached, like duplex units, but smaller, that could be purchased. So it depends on the type of recommendation, the type of development.
So our current affordable housing inventory is 40 units through the Housing Authority. That's on the Orchard Apartments. And then there's additional ones in the condominiums off Blackstone Street. And then there's additional ones in the single-family units off Leland Hill Road. So when a developer comes with 40B, it doesn't matter what style of dwelling is being created. So you can have apartments, condominiums, single-family homes, cottage style, multifamily. It depends on what the developer is looking to build for type of housing, and then a certain percentage have to be affordable. So your affordable units in a community can be all different types of housing units.
But if a developer came in and wanted to build 10, nice, single-family homes, would then one of those, or would he have to build another one that was the same type of home but would be less expensive?
It has to look the same on the exterior. It could have slightly different things on the interior. For example, a single-family home in Leland Estates, for example. The affordable units may have Formica countertops, but the other ones may have granite. Maybe there's linoleum floors in one, hardwood in the other, but from the exterior, you can't tell. And currently, Sutton doesn't have what's known as inclusionary zoning. So in this regard, 40B developers tend to come in to areas of town that aren't zoned for residential. Yes or no sometimes? So for example, if the parcel behind the Sutton Post Office on 146, that's not zoned residential, am I correct? However, if I was a 40B developer, I can come in and put apartments there because I'm allowed to circumvent your zoning. So in that regard, we can get housing in areas that we don't necessarily want housing right now. Additionally, we don't have a requirement that if you came in and made a subdivision of 10 houses, you would be required to build one unit that would be affordable or 2 units that are affordable. That's going to be an inclusionary zoning bylaw, which Wes will talk about, that the legislative body, the voters, will have an opportunity to vote on that type of a bylaw. So right now, the over 55 Wedgwood, that's breaking ground off Armsby, is going to be 54 units, and there,
93.
but they only have water for 54, according to the water district. So they're starting with the 54. We'll go with that. It's supposed to be 93. Right now they're breaking ground on the 54 units that are going to be on the southbound side, correct? But they negotiated for 12% affordability. So Jen, through the planning, got them to agree that of the 93 units, 12 will be affordable. But we don't have a bylaw that necessarily mandates that for every type of housing style.
Do ADUs?
Yeah.
Are ADUs could possibly be part of affordable?
Well, so the ADUs are,
Mike,
What's the question?
so the question is, could ADUs be part of the affordable? ADUs would not count towards the actual affordable housing units on our town inventory unless they are deed restricted.
Just curious.
Yep, was there another question?
Yes. So if
That's accessory dwelling unit. You could build a smaller dwelling adjacent to your home, be used maybe for a relative or a neighbor. You could rent it out. There's a state law that allows you to build up to 900 square feet by right, but you still have to go for approval in the town. And there's a town bylaw for 1,200 square feet. You need to get approval in town. Yeah.
So if a person lived out of town, but they wanted to take advantage of the 40B, would the fact that they, say, worked in town, would that be part of the criteria?
Yes. So if a person worked in town, would they? I assume you're talking about the lottery, local preference for the lottery. Would that be right? So if a person worked in town, would they qualify for local preference underneath the lottery? And I would say the answer would be yes, and it would be us who would make up what the local preference would be. So we could help guide that to be people that work in town, live in town, and stuff like that, so we could actually help with that local preference. Yeah. Okay. So why is this important? And this is going to be a little bit about numbers. So just very quickly, right now we have those numbers we showed, 3,400. There's actually 3,542 at the bottom, total housing stock on the left-hand side. Yes, there we go. This is a lot easier than town hall.
I was going to be Vanna for you.
Yeah. All right, so right now we have 3,542 units in town. And here's how they make up. We kind of discussed there's 55 deed restricted affordable housing units, which means there's 3,487 other units in town, not deed restricted. And if we let 40B developers come in and use a 25% deed restricted versus 75% not deed restricted and just do one-off housing anywhere in town where they just purchase land and do developments, take that as a 25% to 75% ratio, to get to our 299 units, that grows to 4,738 units, right?
Did you use the word single-family homes?
These are single-family homes, yep. So this is not like guiding this towards maybe like a, smaller units, apartments, or things like that as well in town, like a more smarter growth. So it ended up being a 34% increase in the housing units. Now, that's based on the 2020 census. As the town grows, we get to a new census that then looks at, well, what is the size of your town? It's 4,300, let's say, assume this happened by 2030. We're only at 7.5%. So even though we hit our 2020 target, we're still off on our new target, which means we're not at 10%. We gotta add another 118 units, another 354 market rate units to get to 5,210. So that's all single family. And that's why we need to look at a smarter way of, implementing, the affordable housing and other type of units that we want to have in our community to help serve our community. If we were to look at some of the recommendations in this plan, can we cater more towards the 299 in the smarter ways? Like we were talking about maybe like having some apartments where 25% of them are affordable, 75% of them market rate, 100% of them count towards that number. It limits the amount of growth so that we can try to retain the actual character of Sutton. And that's where, yes, again, if we get to the 2030 census, we're still not at 10%, but we're a lot closer. So there's still growth, but it's not like an exponential growth to the town.
So let's pause in a second and talk through some of the numbers. But the way to look at all this is how do we get to the numbers that we need to get to? And I put together some quick math. I'll talk about it now for a second. If we need 300 units and you divide that and you think about we have to be at 10%, but we're not where we need to be right now. So if we actually build at a 15% rate, we would, if you divide 300 divided by 0.05, that gets to 6,000 units. So at the town meeting last fall, you heard people saying, we need 6,000 more units. That's where that math comes from. So the only reason I describe this is the takeaway that by natural growth, you can never get to where we need to get to for the law. So when Wes talks about things like apartments, we talk about 40R, some of these special measures.
No one's defined 40R.
No, we already talked about that. When we talked about how to get to these things, there's some special actions that we have to take in order to get there. And so that's just, as we get into the recommendations, it's a key thing to think through.
So now, we're gonna move on to, we just went through a lot to do with the 40B law, which has been there since 1969. It's there to increase affordable housing throughout the state. Now it's the MBTA. This is a new law that came out a few years ago. So it's Chapter 40A, Section 3A, multifamily zoning, otherwise called MBTA. So in the MBTA, here we are in Sutton. Every town or municipality you see here color-coded is impacted by the MBTA law. It's 177 communities, and it's got a requirement of 15 units per acre. That's a lot denser than Sutton, for sure. And so what is the purpose of the MBTA community? So we went through 40B, which is affordable housing. We're gonna go MBTA, totally separate law. intended to create more multifamily housing. And it restricts the amount of affordable housing to 10%. And this is to encourage profit for the developer. So it has a restriction, upper limit of 10%. Whereas 40B is trying to increase the amount of affordable housing. This is pushing down to actually restrict it to create multifamily for increased profit for the developer. There's no production mandate or requirement to build new units. The law only requires multifamily multifamily by right in a zone. And actual production will depend on several factors, including developers' interests, location, infrastructure, market dynamics. But if you zone it over a greenfield site and it has all that, it would get built. So what is the MBTA community law? Well, what we need to do is establish an overlay district and enact a bylaw where multifamily homes are allowed by right. A multifamily home is where you have 2 or more residential units in one building. And with an effective density of 15 units per acre, so 15 residential units per acre. And for the town of Sutton, we need to have 181 multifamily units within this law, within this zone.
Does one, if it's a 5-unit building, does that count as 5 or 1? 5.
Question was, if it's a 5-unit building, does it count for 5 or 1? The answer would be 5 units. Yes.
Do we have an MBTA bus stop in this town?
Do we have an MBTA bus stop? No.
That's what I thought.
So we are
Military?
we are a small adjacent community. The reason why is that we are caught up in this is because Grafton over by Tufts has a train station. That's why the law is upon us.
So on the previous slide, you might have missed it because it was quick. The regulations require that you slap an overlay district over an area, but there's absolutely no requirement that you build any units. It just has to be an overlay district, which allows it by right. And there's another little ability, and Jen can clear it up if I say it incorrectly. There's a sequencing that you can do. So if you make an overlay district for this not affordable, the multifamily by right, and you slap that zone on first, then you partner with a 40B developer, you get a bang for both bucks. In other words, we need 181 units for MBTA at some point. We don't have to build them. But if we had an overlay area and we had a 40B come in and build us, say, 200 rental units, we get 200 units towards our subsidized housing inventory, and we've just met all the required, they're not even required to be built, but it would be the 181. So you'd be putting 40B in an MBTA. MBTA only allows 10%, but 40B makes you can go up to 25%. So by having your 40B and your MBTA in the same section of town, so for Sutton it could be a 12-acre parcel that has water and sewer near the highway, and you'd be accomplishing all your goals without impacting the farmland in the rural section. It's just a way to get both laws under one area of town. Minimal impact. But MBTA says you have to, it's like you're putting a little curtain over an area of town, but you don't have to build it. Because if there's no developer that wants to put it there, or there's no water and sewer, and the developer doesn't want to put in wells or private septic systems, it may never be built. It's like we've approved as a community a 146 overlay district, which allows certain types of development. I think we have a marijuana overlay district where they can, grow and distribute marijuana in town. These are just little curtains that get put over existing land. But nothing in that MBTA law says that you have to build it. With 40B, if you don't build it and get to 10%, you get punished because it allows a developer to come in and do something you don't want, and the state will back them because you haven't accomplished something the state told you had to do. But for MBTA, all they want you to do is put a veil right over an area of town. So it's not saying if you don't build these 181 units in 5 years, we're gonna come in and we're gonna build them anyways. It's just a little curtain. No, you don't believe me. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, just,
Ooh, do you want a microphone, Ron? You probably need a microphone.
no, I don't know, I think it.
Oh, they want to pick you up for the people on the,
No, it's on.
let me see, come here.
Hello?
Turn it up.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah.
Hello?
Well, you can use this one over here.
Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Let Ron, because this is going to be a long question. It's going to be a long question.
Hi, Ron Roy, 86 Highland View Drive, and I just want to talk a little bit about MBTA. Been involved in a little bit, following it quite often. It's not very popular, and following it too, but it's not very popular. Still being adjudicated through the superior courts. You had a number of towns that rejected it. Even last night, Drake and Freetown, I think, turned it down from the zoning aspect of it too. And the one thing about when you do the concern about zoning is that the state auditor is already determined as an unfunded mandate too, because it would be adding additional costs to the infrastructure, schools, the fire, and even the water and the sewer. I know I'm in the precinct 3 over by, and there's limitations on those resources right now. One thing that I saw in Shrewsbury, I just want to ask the team here, is that we saw that they passed the MBTA, and you had a developer that was going to do 40B. And they switched it from, they reduced the amount of 40B unit down to be more profitable. So they went that route. And so when you start mixing it, you may fall into that category too, where the developer may say, now I can go MBTA instead of doing a 40B project, and I can reduce the amount and get to, be more profitable too. But they just switched it on as soon as they passed it in Shrewsbury.
Right, so. That's a great observation. So you're going to see in the next slides that the group had about 6 different parcels in town that we were looking at, and we were very cognizant of that. So we as a group were able to look at the pros and cons of each parcel, and for several of the parcels, for example, down on Lackey Dam Road, there's a big warehouse that was just built. There's another warehouse that has been kind of permitted, but the developer's having a hard time finding someone to construct warehousing, but has someone that might be interested in building housing. Well, since that's not zoned residential and there's no MBTA overlay that would allow housing to go there, the only way that they can build housing there would be 40B, which would get us closer to our 10%. So there is the fact that there was already a 40B developer, and then it gets slapped over. He got the opportunity to market. So by being mindful of where we may not want someone to come increase our housing in an area that would be market that's not currently zoned for housing, we were very mindful of where to put the MBTA overlay. And you'll see that in the other slides. I think overall, and you can all agree, I think the 15 of us were very aware of mindful growth, trying to minimize the amount of growth, and understanding that there's a benefit of us to get to the 10% to reduce the ability to have unbridled growth. And there was a lot of discussion about the potential lots that were available, and you'll see that.
Yeah, and I'm going to hand it over to Jim now in a second, but what I want to just also say is I don't think many of us also really like the MBTA law. So it's just how do we best deal with it to try to restrict the growth so that we can actually have growth that works with our community versus have this unrestricted growth that becomes a strain in our community.
Yeah, thank you, Wes. Ron.
Yeah, the only point is, we're 9 miles away from the MBTA station.
So,
right?
let me just read,
I think we should file for an exemption somehow with the,
yeah.
we'll talk about that later, but we're 9 miles away, it's not really practical to
Ron's raising an interesting point, which is Sutton is next to Grafton. The train line goes through Grafton. Personally, I don't think somebody's going to live in Sutton to go to Grafton to go an hour and a half into South Station. That is all for our purposes right here today, irrelevant, because it's not a matter of do we like the law or not like the law. This exercise is about how do we thoughtfully comply. And then at town meeting, we'll have a chance to debate and discuss all of this and make some decisions. But for purposes of today, we're looking at how do we actually comply with the law. So what we're going to talk about right now is about our recommendations. I see my colleague Christine's going to say something.
Can I borrow that for a second? So the group also made a decision. As Jim mentioned, our goal was to come up with an option that would be mindful and minimizing and comply with the law. At the end of the day, Ron is correct. The community could decide to not comply, but that wasn't the purpose of our group. It's not the purpose of the select board to decide. It's for the voters to decide. So we had to come to town meeting in the fall with an option that we felt as this committee of 15 people was the most mindful way to comply. If the legislative body, the voters, decided they don't want to, then the select board would have to act on their behalf and maybe pursue some of what Ron was mentioning. There's a cost with non-compliance. And I think when Wes presents the options we came up with, you might decide as a voter that you think that this is a minimal impact and that it's less expensive for the community to just opt for this versus to join everybody, because that could be legal costs, that could be loss of grant funding. And we did look at how much we get in grant funding. In some years it's not significant, in other years it's very significant, but the regulations have a little tiny word that says, or other agencies. So we did kind of look and say, in 2024, I think we had 16 million in grant funds come into our town, all grants, federal grants, state grants, school grants. Not all those fall under this, however, or other agencies. We just looked at the worst case scenario. So we had 12 million in 2023, 16 million in 2024. We're looking at a total budget of 42 million. That's a lot of grant revenue. So what would the tax rate be if we walked away from 100%? If somehow the federal government jumped on this, which I doubt they would. But we were trying to say, how would it impact your tax bill, and how impactful is the zone that we chose? That it's up to you guys to decide at fall town meeting.
So thank you. So to recap, what we want to do is find a way to thoughtfully comply. That's the purpose of today's. So, in looking at all this, you just do me a favor, click through. Yep, so we looked at several different parcels, and what our group came down to is looking at, really on this map above me, you can see Market 32, you can see Five Guys, Starbucks, the car wash, and so that whole area. I've got Vanna White over my shoulder here pointing for people that are yellow and red colorblind, which I'm sure you can see. So anyhow, one might say, hey, Jim and team, that's already built on. Yes, it is. And that's okay. If you look at communities that are closer to Boston, they have to zone areas that are already built on. So we are, by doing this, we are totally complying with the law in a thoughtful way. I mentioned the 40R, the smart growth zone, that mixed use zone before. Personally, there's a decision we would need to make for a town. There's only so much market demand for housing. So personally, I would much rather zone an area for 40R where the town, yep, so okay, yeah. In any case, there's different ways to get the multifamily zoning, one of which money comes to us, we'll talk more about that. The other way is this mandated way. So we picked these zones to give the townspeople a good option to vote on when it comes to town meeting in a way that is minimally impactful, invasive, and I'm going to pass the microphone to my colleague on the left who wants to talk.
I was going to let you say it. So this zone is already developed. So if the structure of the buildings was strong enough, you could put apartments on top. Since this is newly developed commercial areas, the chance of the owner raising the buildings to put multifamily housing is small. However, if the structure could handle a second floor or third floor, theoretically they could put some apartment rentals on top of Bruno's Pizza, on top of the Kidney Center. That would be up for the owner to decide. So, do you see? So maybe in 50 years, if the buildings fell into disrepair and they raised them, there would be an overlay there that at that point would allow brand new apartment buildings. So right now, the chance of him demolishing the buildings to put housing is slim, and whether or not structurally the current existing buildings could handle a second or third floor would be up to an engineer to decide. So that's where it was. The mindful ability that it doesn't have to be built for apartments, but that it could be, and there's nothing stopping the developer if he wanted to put it there, but there's something already on the property.
Okay. Any other questions right now?
Can I just ask?
Yep.
I'm sorry. The little numbers that you have in here, like 993, what are those? Are they just lot numbers?
Yes.
Lot numbers.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So 993, that's from the Sutton GIS mapping, yep, yep. But it's 17 Galaxy Pass, 15 Pleasant Valley, 10 Galaxy Pass. Yep.
Now, don't the businesses or owners of those businesses that are in Galaxy Pass have anything to say about whether
So-
they get stuff built on top of the
Well,
buildings already?
so the question would be: do the business owners, are they happy with this zoning going over them? Would that be kind of the question?
I mean, I'm not sure who.
They don't have to build. Would be. I want to get the question though. Is the question that are they happy with the zoning going over their land, or would they be happy trying to build up over the existing buildings?
Do they have any say?
Do they have any say?
In other words, whoever-
Yes.
Whoever owns where Bruno's Pizza is, would they have any say about whether or not things could be built above their?
They would have say, and so the Jen has had discussions with the owner of Galaxy, and he is okay with this zoning. Building up over the building, building up over the existing building, that would be like a structural analysis. It would also be a cost-benefit analysis in the long run. It might not necessarily even work out for a cost-benefit analysis to build up over an existing building like that. So that's a much larger, technical discussion, or financial discussion.
The decision's completely his.
Yeah, it's not ours, it's the owners, and Bruno's is leasing from the owner, which Jen has already had a discussion with. Any other questions? Okay. This is very similar to the previous slide. I did like this, except for it just adds in the 181 units. If we do not, say control our own destiny with our recommendations as a community and work for the community, then the numbers just get even larger. So this is where instead of going from 3,542, we're now up to 5,398 units if we just pick a greenfield site for that to be zoned, which is why it's important to have it into a mixed area where it's existing buildings, and maybe someday in the long future it could have a mixed walkable future with a community in and around businesses. So on to the other, we put that recommendation with the actual MBTA law so it flowed better this time around. We're going to get on to the other recommendations and strategies to how to achieve our goals. Well, some of the easier ones is to continue the ongoing community outreach, such as what we're doing here today. So have more of a regular annual or something like that. We'll have to work out maybe with Jen for check-in with the community on the housing production and other requirements in the town. And also obtain a regional affordable housing coordinator. So this would be somebody who could possibly work for the town, but not necessarily a full-time position. Maybe somebody who works with is shared resource with other adjacent communities with us. Because think about it, there's a group of 15 of us that did the update to this plan. It's a lot of work, right? And so to to just let go of it and let it be for another 5 years' time. It'd be good to have somebody actually, working on this on a regular basis. That's what the community would need. I'm gonna hand it over, I'll hand the microphone over to Jim.
Excellent, thank you. Wes, if you wouldn't mind just clicking through this for a moment. So there are gonna be two different types of funds we're gonna talk about for a moment. One is the CPA, Community Preservation Act Fund. The other is the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we're gonna talk about ways to create housing, ways to provide that incentive to do a few things. The question is always, hey, where does that money come from? And so there's two mechanisms we're gonna talk about. So the first is this CPA fund, and that money can be used for three different things. One is affordable housing, the second is historical preservation, the third is for open space. And the way that fund gets created, imagine your tax bill goes up by 1%, 2%, or 3%, in that range. At a 1% level, imagine it this way. If your tax bill is $5,000, you pay an extra $50 for that year. If we do it at the 3% level, that $5,000 tax bill would be $150. And the reason we do this is to raise money. The benefit to going at that higher level, at that 3%, is there's a chance the state might match that dollar for dollar. Now, in any given year, we don't know if the state will do it. It depends on a few other things. But there's a potential for us to get dollar for dollar matching money from the state if we increase our tax bills by 3 percentage points. There are a few key exclusions. For example, we could exclude $100,000 of property value. So that would take the sting out a little bit. We can also exclude it for certain age brackets, and that might be something we'll look at. So as we look at ways to raise money to do these things, our team likes the idea of the CPA fund. Now I do think, as speaking now as a select board member, we have to consider that in the context of everything else budget-wise. So while I like it from a CPA point of view, we'll just have to take a look at, in the context of the budget, does it make sense in any given year? Which is a decision to make at town meeting. But as a funding mechanism, we like this. Yeah, ma'am.
I would just like to speak on everyone's behalf and say all seniors should be excluded.
Yes, thank you. So that comment was all seniors are excluded. That's definitely one of the provisions or one of the exclusions to look at for
Thank
sure.
you so much.
Yeah.
Could you also explain that it's not 3% of the assessed value?
Yeah, I said it's the taxes. So it's not I would fall off my chair if you said it's a 3% on your assessed value. It's a 3% increase in your tax bill. So again, if your tax bill's $5,000, 3% of that is $150. So it's, generally speaking, less painful than 3% of your property assessed value. So that's that one mechanism. So I like to make a lot of comparisons to Grafton, as some people know. Grafton did pass this, and they used it to do a few things. They preserved some historic facades of certain buildings. They've used this to build some affordable housing. So some of our neighboring towns have done this. There are lots of examples across the state of how different communities have used this CPA fund for good purposes. So it's definitely worth considering in the context of the budget for the year. So related to that, there's this Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That to me is the more impactful fund to create. So with that, we can do certain things. So as a town, I think we should consider, should we actually build housing? Should we buy housing? Should we do deed restrictions of existing housing units? And where would the money for that come from? It would come from that fund. So we'll talk about what's called inclusionary zoning. In inclusionary zoning, there might be a way for a developer to pay the town money that the town can then use to do some of these other projects and things with. So just think about a developer, instead of building units, they give us money that we can then use to do some things with. And that's how these funds would flow. Let me pause for a second and see a few questions. Ma'am?
So you would tax us more to create a fund to help lower income people move here?
Yeah, let me repeat that. So the question, the comment was, would we tax more to help lower income people move here? Let me break that down for a second. So the CPA fund would be a way to do that. Doesn't have to be used for the subsidized housing. That would be a way to do that. So there could be from that money, some money used to create these affordable housing units. It would be small, but that would be one way. This municipal affordable housing trust would not be a tax on people. That would be money coming in from other sources, including the CPA, but I think primarily that would come from developers contributing money into that fund to use to create the deed restricted lottery units. Let me pause for a second.
So one more question on that.
Yep.
Under open space, over the years, the townspeople have purchased open space to keep the rural environment like the Shaw Farm. And yet in some other document I saw, you think open, not you, but that open space is fair game to put in more of these dwellings
Yeah.
on. So over the years, there's promises made that places, and I'll use the Shaw Farm, will just be what it is. Is the town intending to take those kind of properties that they've purchased over the years to make us Sutton, to then give it away to
Yeah.
that?
Let me recap that question. So the question and comment was really about open space, and then how do we use open space in town, and are we considering doing housing on town-owned property? So to break that apart in a few pieces, as a town, personally, I love our open space and things we do to maintain open space. So full stop, period after that. We should encourage open space. The issue of how we use things like Shaw Farm, the town beach, etc., that's a good discussion. That's a separate discussion to have. I mean, I love Shaw Farm. My own view on this is it's the world's nicest dog park right now. We should think of a better way. And I know Jen Hager back here has some great plans for how we use Shaw Farm. The whole issue of how we use town property for housing, that's something Jerry's going to talk about, and could we look at using town property for housing? That's also an open discussion. But those are three separate issues, and from a personal perspective, I don't think we should take good farmland and make it housing, personally. Any comments or reactions to that? Okay, yes ma'am.
I just wanna say, we need our trees.
Yep,
We need our trees. The more trees you lose,
yeah, so
the
there's
more you're
the,
not gonna be able to breathe.
yeah, yep. Comment is we need our trees, and I fully agree we need our open space. So we veered a little bit, but again, from a CPA point of view, this could be used to help preserve open space, historical projects and things like that. It doesn't have to be used for housing. But again, keep in mind, we want to achieve our 18 to 20 units per year so that we can be in safe harbor, so that we can enforce our zoning laws, so that we can protect our trees. Right? Did I link all that together? That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to thoughtfully comply with these laws to do the right things to keep Sutton Sutton and all that. So it's a fine balance, right? Some of these things trade off against each other, and that's really what our team's been looking at. How do we optimize between these competing things? All right, I know that was a lot, and we veered into some new territories. Any other questions on this on the CPA fund and this municipal housing trust fund? The one comment I'll put on here, we'll come up with this a little bit later, is the in lieu of contributions. So when we talk about inclusionary zoning, Christine mentioned it before, on the Armsby development, Jen negotiated for the developer to do 12% of those units into affordable housing, into the subsidized housing inventory. There's a scenario where we could take cash instead. And so the thing we have to look at is, if we were going to get 12 units from that development, could we take the cash and create 20 units, 25 units through some other means? That's all something we have to look at and consider. But there might be, in a different meeting, I used the phrase bang for our buck. We might get more bang for our buck by taking the cash and then creating more units, and we might actually get there faster. We might get to our goal faster by doing that. But these are all things we're considering and looking at. Let me pass the microphone back to Wes.
Thank you, Jim. Well, we'll get into the inclusionary zoning. It's been mentioned a good few times, and to deal with affordable housing. Remember when we talked earlier on about every 10 units in Sutton, it was like taking money out of the bank savings account, and we need to put one back in. Well, inclusionary zoning is kind of that tool to put the savings back into the bank. Think about it that way. So every 10 houses that are built equals one more affordable housing unit that needs to be built within the town to keep us level. Not building back to that, we're at 1.57% right now, not adding to that. So our recommendation would be that anytime there's 4 more units being built by developer, we'd have a 15% affordable unit production. It would round up to the nearest whole unit. So you're not gonna have 3.7 houses affordable, round up to 4, we'll say. And a developer could provide a cash payment to Sutton's Affordable Housing Trust, which Jim just spoke about, in lieu of the 15% affordable housing units. So these are key requirements, so that when we see developments being built, Jen wouldn't have to negotiate with the developer necessarily. It's already in the bylaw. They have to start with 15% affordable housing anytime that there is a development. And that sorry.
So I just have a question. When you say the builder or the developer has to put in cash infusion, right? How do we figure what that cash should be? Is it based upon what the affordable units that we're giving up?
So so it'd be based upon the question is how much is the value, like dollar value,
Right.
of that payment out. We don't necessarily have the exact formula. Jen is working on the formula right now, but it's basically looking at the value of the units that are being produced and the delta for the, not basically taking the entire cash difference, but nearly cash difference, so that of the affordable housing units, so that the developer is still on the hook for most of the value of that unit, but could maybe buy out the actual affordable housing units, have a bit of a gain maybe going for the actual buyout, but we get a significant amount of cash to go to the town. You don't want it to be a case where it's a really good interest for the developer just to provide $100,000 for that unit to cash out. And we want to be able to float up and down based on the value of the development, because one development might be a $500,000 price point for a market rate. Down the road it's a $1.2 million development, so it can't be just a flat fee of $200,000 cash. It needs to go floating based on an actual calculation, based on the actual rate of what's being sold in that development. Yeah, the margin. That answer, Jen, what you're thinking of for the? Yeah, okay, close enough.
It would go with the bylaw.
Yeah, it's working on it in the bylaw, which we're not writing the bylaws, we're doing the recommendations for what is to be in the bylaw.
And all bylaws get voted by the board.
And everything we're here is going to be coming to the town for vote. Yes?
Why not have a development where all of the houses that are being built are affordable houses?
Okay.
This way here, you don't have 8 houses with BMWs parked out front and 2 units with Chevy Sparks parked out front, because there's going to be a certain amount of jealousy and a certain amount of hate. So you just create everybody on an even playing field.
Yeah.
And keep them that way.
I take it, you like a Chevy? I have a Ford.
Ford.
You like Ford?
I have 2 Fords.
Good man. So basically, we can. And that is, Jerry's going to speak a little bit about recommendations about what the town could do. And it kind of feeds into what Jim talked about with the CPA and then the Affordable Housing Trust. So we need to start some mechanism for collecting money. And this is going to kind of, the question was, why don't we build a development that has all affordable housing units instead of a mixed? We can, but we need to start somewhere. And where that somewhere kind of starts is, we need money. And part of that is a CPA could take some money off, a little bit of taxes Jim has already spoke about, or have the Affordable Housing Trust where developers start to put cash in and we get other resources to get cash into it. And we start to have, the town starts to have a bit of a bank of money. Maybe it's not Shaw Farm. My kids call me the Lorax, speaker of the trees, because I love trees. I don't like to see a tree cut down anywhere. But I mean, maybe it's a parcel of land that comes up for sale, and Sutton could have the first right of refusal to purchase the land. That's perfect for a development, and we could use that bank of money that we have to purchase the land that works great for an actual development that's going to be that could be maybe over 55s or veteran owned and then multifamily, but it's all affordable. Once it's our land, our building, we could state what it's going to be.
Stay away from over 55 development.
Okay?
There are banks out there that if you buy in over 55 development, they will not finance it.
Yep.
And the reason for that is an over 55 development, I'm over 55, so let's say I bought an over 55 unit. I'd have trouble selling it if I moved on because I have to sell it to an over 55 person.
Yep.
And usually if you're over 55, you want something new, you don't want something used.
Okay. That's good feedback.
And banks won't finance it.
That's not true. Banks will finance them. You can't discriminate on that.
Cornerstone will not finance.
There's more to that story because I'm in banking, and you can't do that.
Okay.
Okay, here's another one for you. How come Bank of America won't finance commercial vehicles?
It's out of my league. I don't do commercial.
You can't say they're prejudiced, they're just careful.
Well, we're gonna tie that into the town land in a few minutes. But we need to start where we have the money coming in or availability to take money, and then we can guide our own development the way we want it. And that could be where it's all affordable or more affordable, it could be 50% affordable. So that's where we use our money to do something in town.
Can I just ask one more question? For any of the monies that are raised, whether it be through the taxes or whatever, when that fund bills and we want to do something as a town, that's something that has to be voted to be able to use these funds?
Yes. Yep.
Wes, that was an important question. Can you just restate that and the answer?
So if anything's coming up where the money is going to be used for a project or for land, the money's going to be spent, that is going to come before the voters. So that was the question, but that's also answered the question. It's going to come before the community. It's not a case where somebody holds the financing keys and decides a decision to go do something.
So this has come up a bit as far as 40R we've talked about. I'm sorry, I've got to stand, I can't sit this long. So 40R is something that the state came up with in 2004. It's basically a way to encourage communities to create more dense residential and commercial areas. There are some financial incentives with this. Ideally, first, let's go back. 40R basically are mixed-use communities. Mixed-use buildings are where commercial space is on the ground floor with residential space on the upper floors. And how many floors are above it is up to whatever is decided at that point. The good thing with 40R is it can help us as a community create a lot of affordable housing or meet our SHI needs, okay? With this, there are some financial incentives, and that's why it's important to look at this. When we're talking about this, first of all, if we zone something in parcel as 40R, we can get up to anywhere from $10,000 to $600,000 contributed to the town, which the town can use however they like, okay?
It's a one-time payment.
Yes, a one-time payment. In addition to that, for every unit on that parcel within 40R that is permitted, say we have 100 units, then we get $3,000 at the moment that is permitted to the town itself as a one-time payment, okay? So we're talking about quite a bit of money to help offset some of the other costs that are involved with these things. Because yes, there are other costs that we've looked at. We know for the national averages for every 1,000 residents that are added to the population, you need another 2.5 police officers. So the same goes for similar with fire departments and so forth. There are other needs with all this. But the nice thing with 40R also is because these are multifamily, we know their children are moving into this, the state also recognized that with 40R, there's gonna be a burden put onto the school system. So for every child that would be part of the local school system, they're also giving that school system the money to pay for that child to go to school, basically in our neighborhood or in our community.
If it exceeds.
Yes, if it exceeds. There's always stipulations, no matter what. So with this, we've looked at different areas, we've talked about it. This is just an example. Actually, the owners down at Galaxy Pass are very interested in this from what we've been told. This, there's that big lot there that's opened. What is this word? No.
Oh, can you just point above your head there? Wait, Joe, 3 more buildings?
Here?
Yeah, so it's just a quick rendering and overlay. 3 large buildings could easily go into that. In this example, we're looking at a 3-story building only. The second and third floor would each have 16 units. So for 3 buildings, we're looking at 96 units. If we up that to 100, then the state gives us even more money. Once we hit 100% or 100 units with this.
Hey, can you talk about the affordability and how it goes to the SHI? We do this too? It kind of rolls.
So with that, we can, the nice thing with 40R over 40B is that 40B, we have really no say in it, okay? We have no control. The developer can come in, override it. With 40R, if the town should vote and pass a 40R zoning, and we zone a parcel, we can write the bylaws to include various things. One is that 40R requires a minimum of 20% affordable housing. We can actually push that to much greater numbers if we want. Now, if we do 25% affordable housing on that, if they're all rental units, the entire building, then everything counts as affordable, okay? Counts toward our SHI. So not just the 25%, say if it's 100 units, not 25 of them, but all 100 units would. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the beauty of 40R, is it gives us more control over our destiny here. Now, so with this, in addition to it, it can look various ways. So 40R, it's the developer who's making the designs, determining what the buildings look like and so forth. With 40R, these are just some examples. We could do something that would be more fitting for our community. We could write that into the bylaws. Now, would that actually happen? It's hard to say. A lot of 40R developments look more like this. So it all comes down to depending on how we want the bylaws written, okay? For us as a working group, these are recommendations. That's all this is, okay? We're not writing any of this, we're just giving suggestions on this. So 40R though, me personally, I think this is the fastest and easiest way for us to meet our affordable housing needs for this community. It gives us some financial incentives. It helps offset any additional school costs that might be. It's a great, easy way to do it. And this is a way that we can contain our development and keep our open spaces so that we don't have land destroyed. In addition to this, there are a few other recommendations that we had. One was cottage housing, which if anyone went to the last couple of town meetings, you'll hear quite a bit about this. Cottage housing, ideally, the original term coined was pocket neighborhoods, basically small communities, where you can see in this plan view, you've got housings on the outside, and you've got a kind of a central common area in the middle, whether it's a community building, common gardens, community gardens, whatever it might be. This can be done in a way where it makes sense for our community and keeps the rural characteristics. Again, it depends on how the bylaws are written. So if you have thoughts, please share them. So usually cottage housings are single-family homes. They can be duplexes. You start seeing them throughout the country quite a bit more as duplexes because it's cheaper to build a duplex than it is to build a single-family home. Typically, they're 20% affordable housing. It all comes down to the bylaws, really, as to how it's done. So, in addition to all this, the one that I think that was touched on before was using public property. There are a couple ways with public property. So the town does own quite a bit of land throughout, scattered around, okay? We could put out an RFP, a request for proposal, for those parcels should the town decide to have a developer, either we sell it to a developer or we just contract with a developer, work with a developer to create our own affordable housing, okay? With that is we can dictate at that point, yes, we can make it all 100% affordable. It doesn't have to be a mix of market rate and affordable. We can say, okay, we want it all this way. We can drive all this. Now, the state has also done this. So in February of this year, the state has actually, they wrote a policy called a home for everyone. And in that, they basically are looking at taking state-owned land and converting it to affordable housing, which was actually in the news today, surprisingly. 450 acres that the town or the state just sold off to create 3,500 affordable units. So it is a possibility. There is state-owned land here that is unprotected open space that they could use. So, and that's I guess that's a key term we should quickly mention. There is a difference between open space and unprotected open space. Open space means you can't touch it. It stays open space. There's unprotected open space which can be developed. So town-owned land that we're looking at and that we're talking about is those spaces that hasn't been protected, okay? And with that, if we were to develop something like this, we're controlling our destiny more, okay? We're telling the developer what we want, how it's done. We can basically control every aspect of it, whether what it looks like, how many trees are torn down, whatever it might be. So it's a good option for us. This is where we could take funds that are put into the CPA, into the funds that we might get for in lieu of, that we can use that to create this kind of affordable housing for our local residents, ideally. So the key with this,
Just go back 1 second. And when Jerry mentioned we could guide, I think he said like we could guide these or make these what we want or something like that. Help guide them. This photo here, I got that from Ed Sopel from Delbrook JKS. They're a large construction company based out of Quincy. And this is built over in Carlisle back maybe about 10, 12 years ago. I had no involvement with this project, but I do work with Delbrook and the developer that did build this. So like a tangent, I do know about this project, but it's not mine, not one I ever consulted with. But this is a great example because this is one where the town used their own land, put it as RFP, Carlisle. They wanted to maintain rural character. So they wanted this new building to look like it is an actual farm. So you can see like they got the farm building and you have the silo. That's all brand new construction and it's all for affordable housing. So they did the RFP for the design, worked the architects to make it look like what they wanted. That was the design criteria for the base of design. And then NOAA is a developer that actually built it, and they're the developer that funded it, built it, they maintain it, and Delbrook is the construction company that built it. So this is something, just an example of like, we could pick what kind of character we want in building and guide it if it's our land, if it's our money, if we buy the land through a CPA, into an affordable housing trust, how all these things kind of link together, we just need to start them.
so there is land throughout, like I said before, throughout the town itself.
Microphone.
I hate microphones. So there are towns throughout, or parcels of land throughout. I live just up the street here on Jones Road. There are 2 parcels at the end of Jones Road that could be used. There are parcels throughout other parts of town. There are stipulations, there are concerns with some of those that they're not ideal for doing this, but there are others, there's other things that could be done to make them ready, so.
Could you post a map on the website of the open spaces that are, however you describe them?
Jen
Or is that just
explained-
too much work?
There's a map
Oh.
right there. So I made sure,
Oh, good.
because I thought you'd be curious.
Yes.
That map is the town's open space map. And it shows the town parcels. It shows areas like Christine, like Vanna was just pointing to, the yellow area, which is protected open space. That is Sutton State Forest and Purgatory State Forest. It shows other protected open space like the purpley area, which is Wilkinsonville Water District Reservoir area. So you can kind of peruse that. But one thing I want you to keep in mind on this map is we see a lot of green on there. All of that green is chapter land. So that is right now, right this minute, that is protected open space for tax purposes. Private landowners have their land in tax status. That is not guaranteed protected. So should a landowner find themselves in a situation or have an opportunity, they can pull their land out of chapter land status and sell it for development. So right now, those green areas are protected and the owners are paying less taxes on those. But I just want you to keep in mind that those green areas can be converted to developable land. So I wanted you to have that map so you can get your eyes on what's out there and get a good look at your community.
So where do we go from here? That's a good question. We continue with things like this, doing community outreach. That's key to everything. Part of it is there is so much information. Even us with 15 of us on there, we're throwing out information, we're having to revisit. It's a lot of things for everyone to learn. So we don't have all the answers. No one's ever going to have all the answers because we're going to have to constantly search. So it's a continued educational process here. The next step is that we have to complete this housing production plan. And we've got to get it back to the planning board for approval, which will send it to the select board for approval before they send it to the state. So that's got to get done so that we can get to the next step.
Yeah. So just in terms of where we go from here, as Jerry said, I'd be really interested in hearing what do people in this room want? Because as we talked about, there's the need to solve for the state compliance with the laws, and we talked about that. That means creating these subsidized housing inventory units that generally speaking will benefit people from outside of Sutton. What I'd be really interested in hearing is what do people in this room want? We talk about over 55, we talk about cottage to maybe downsize. My mother, who many of you know, who's coming back from the hospital today, she wants to stay in her house and forever, right? But that's her. But I'd be curious to know, what do people in this room want from a living situation? We talked about ADUs for a moment. Personally, I think the ADU thing is great because my in-laws who live in Webster, if they got to the point where we had to help them out, an ADU would be wonderful for them. Then maybe I pass it to my sons when they get back from college, and then maybe my wife and I move there, and my sons move into our house. Something like that. But just while we're sitting here for the remaining time, it'd be great to hear what do people in this room want as far as housing. Ma'am.
Jim, I was just gonna say, I did the survey, so I think you have my answers already, but I do think, I want to thank you for all of this hard work and effort, because this is huge for every community, and the more outreach that we have, obviously the better. Because what I'm concerned about is that people don't truly understand this, and without us becoming masters of our own destiny, we are subject to that outside development. So this is so crucial, and I think, we try our best to communicate with our neighbors, get them engaged. People have to become involved in this, and I think the answer, I don't know the answer to the question, but I think it's a combination of all of the things that you have presented. We obviously have a need for housing. It may be a combination of all of these things, and the more we know, the better informed informed we are. Hopefully, if this goes to the town for votes, people have to be aware of what they're voting for, because to shoot it down because they don't understand it is going to be so detrimental to all of us. So thank you for all of your hard work and effort.
Thank you.
And with that in mind, we have the final and last presentation like this is next Monday down at Braxton Hall at Manchuk. So please spread the word.
And just to recap on that too, just as you said, there's so many different pieces of this. Jerry and Wes are experts in this, but some of us had never heard about 40B, 40R, 40S, 40 this, 40 that. So in order to make informed decisions, it really is good to understand the different pieces and then, as you said, be involved and be part of the conversation. So thank you.